Good morning and welcome to the Forum at St. Bart's. I'm Peter Thompson, the Associate Rector for Formation and Liturgy here, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this conversation with the Reverend Canon Stephanie Spellers, Canon to the Presiding Bishop of the Episcopal Church for Evangelism, Reconciliation, and Creation. She'll be joined in conversation with the Right Reverend Dean Wolfe, our Rector, and to more fully introduce her, I'll hand it over to Dean.
Well, Stephanie, in some ways you don't need an introduction to St. Bart's. We consider you part of the gang here, and we're so glad to have you back. This is really a wonderful, provocative, interesting book, and I'm looking forward to discussing it with you. So I'm going to turn it over to you because I think you wanted to begin by saying a few things, and then we'll open it up for questions. And I have a couple, but I think people listening will have some too. So our warmest welcome to you. Hope you feel at home.
Thank you. I always do, and I really appreciate the invitation and just the time and the community. I've been sitting at home alone, and this is what happens when I have too much time at home. So the
time, I think.
What's that?
Pretty creative use of the time.
Why not? The other thing that happens when you give me time is that I create PowerPoints. So, so just kind of this starter. And if you hear in this Holy Disruption, if you hear Batman after that, that's kind of what I hear. So Holy Disruption, Batman. So I just wanted to offer a few meditations, just some opening thoughts about the church cracked open. And being a church cracked open, really, and where is our hope in the midst of this for beloved community? And of course, if you are curious about the book, curious about these reflections, you can go to www.churchcrackedopen.com. If you want more of this conversation, I think Peter will offer a word on this as well later, but this is almost like the teaser that we're doing right now for a session on Wednesday at 6:30, where I'll be joined by Mark Bazzuti Jones, Kelly Brown Douglas, Winnie Varghese, Sandra Montez, and anybody else we can rope in. Dean Wolfe will be with us, as will Matt Hyde and folk from Church of the Heavenly Rest and others all over New York to talk about Church Cracked Open. But it's great to be able to do some, just kind of to break it open first right here with St. Bart's, my parish. So what is this holy disruption that we have been really just kind of shaken by over the last year? I don't think that there's anybody who would pretend that we have not in the last year been well and truly cracked open. Our churches, our communities, our society. And again, I feel like it's pretty fair to assume even in our own hearts, all of us have experienced this cracking open. I hope that you've been open to that, to the cracks that have been wrought by COVID pandemic, by racial reckoning, by economic crisis. And if you look even closer, I think you can acknowledge that there are also these cracks in our life that have been left by decades of disappearing church relevance and membership. I feel like over the last year, every crack that was out there has been exposed. And we have been in a year-long tailspin. What is church when you can't go inside the building? What is that? What is incarnate community? Like, we're the incarnational Christians. What is that when you can't leave home, or when leaving home and being with other people is dangerous? What is America? We've had to ask those questions. What is America? What is the land of the free, the home of the brave, if it's actually built on white domination and supremacy? There are really some fundamentals that have broken open, and you can pick your metaphor, wandering in the wilderness, whatever. The fact is that we have been cracked. Disruption is a way of life right now for us. And what I see in that is a choice. When everything has cracked open like this, we have a choice. We could reassemble the cracked pieces of our churches, the pieces of our nation, so that everything looks as much like the original as possible. And that is tempting. Everybody wants a normal, whether it's a new normal or back to the old normal, we all want normal. I see Peter shaking, like nodding, isn't we all? Everybody wants normal now. I wonder though, if we could embrace this opportunity instead, this opportunity of disruption, this opportunity in the chaos to turn. And I'm thinking especially about the way of love, these practices for Jesus-shaped life. The first practice is turning. I wonder if we can look at the realities that are now in front of us, see what's possible in the midst of the disruption and the cracking. See God issuing an invitation in the midst of the cracking open. An invitation to us, to our institutions, our churches, our families, to become whole in a way that we were not whole before this. I'm going to say that again. Is there an opportunity here with these cracked pieces all around us to become whole in a way that we were not whole before? So to me, that's the opportunity. That's the thing I'm most curious about. It's what I wanted to explore in this book, The Church Cracked Open, and what I'm grateful to be able to explore with you right now is this opportunity for turning what the Greeks would call it as metanoia. And I feel like even though, like, if we were all in one place together, I would say that with me, metanoia. So maybe I'll ask Peter and Dean, say that with me, metanoia.
Metanoia.
Exactly. And what it means is a turning of the heart or the mind away from one path and toward another. It's the word that Jesus is preaching in Mark at the very beginning of his ministry when he says, the time is fulfilled, the kingdom of God has come near, repent and believe in the good news. In other words, turn, embrace metanoia. That's the opportunity that we have here. That opportunity, that invitation has been out there for a while now. I think of Phyllis Tickle, who was just such a wonderful, a sage really in our church. She was this, like, I think she was in her 70s, and when she really kind of hit the scene, 70s, in her 70s, but it was actually just maybe 10 years ago. She was on the scene talking about emergent Christianity, talking about this idea that Christianity was about to go through was in the midst of one of those major turns. She called them rummage sales. And she would talk about how, how every 500 years, Christianity would hold a rummage sale or have an awakening. And in these rummage sales, we would purge what was no longer useful and reform ourselves for whatever is the age to come. And what she said, this was like, again, probably 2005, something like that, in the aughts. She said we were entering the age of the Spirit and that our obsession with order and control would backfire and we would be forced into the arms of the Spirit. At the time, churches were wetting their pants. And if it looked like we were doing that then, we're definitely doing it now. Phyllis's response to all of that at the time, and again, you got to picture this like elder white woman, strong Southern accent, sitting back in her home in Memphis, Tennessee, white hair flowing. And she would just tell folks, it's happening. Our jaws should drop open in amazement, she said. We are seeing a shift in Christianity as dramatic as that first Pentecost wildfire. I feel like that's what happened to us last March. when the doors shut, first just a few of them, and then all of them, all the doors of the churches shut, the doors of our homes shut. And we were hiding out in that upper room, scared of the virus, scared of the unknown. But we were also praying, right? We took up practices of prayer, asking God for help. We were turning to each other, and we started to make a way. And we started to tell the truth about our financial, emotional, spiritual lives and how much we had poured into our buildings. And we started telling the truth about clericalism and how we have operated as if it's not really church if there's not a priest or a bishop present. And we started to wonder if maybe God was leading us through a radical reformation, a reformation, training us to see holiness closer to home. And even as you were participating in this forum, you're doing it at home. I hope that right now your home feels holier now than it did a little more than a year ago. I hope that you trust that you can have an intimate relationship with God beyond the building, beyond the clergy facilitating it. I hope that maybe we can be church. I want to put a question up now for you, up here on the screen. And we can actually use, am I going to be able to, this question up here? Ah, darn, I don't have this question up. So I'm just going to ask you straight up. Are there ways that you feel like you have been church more profoundly in the last year? Are there ways that you have felt closer to God in the last year, in this time of pandemic? And I invite you to write it into the chat box. And maybe even Peter and Dean, if you want to ponder that question with me, are there ways in this time that you have felt like even though we were not the same kind of church we had been, maybe we became a different kind of church? Something you would want to hold on to.
Yeah, I'll say that two things that come immediately to mind for me are we have a night prayer community that started almost exactly a year ago. They meet to pray Compline or night prayer or some version thereof every weeknight at 8:30, and it's become a community of prayer. It's become a community that asks one another about their days, about what's going on in their lives, and prays for the concerns they have in each other's lives. And we also, when the pandemic started, people were at home and we wanted to make sure they had stuff to do. We dramatically increased our education formation program. And now people are asking these spiritual questions, I think a lot more than they were pre-pandemic, and gathering in community almost every night in some way. And that's been, we didn't have that kind of engagement before. Or if we did, it was mostly on Sunday.
And I would say that, historically, our Good Friday meditations had always been done by clergy. And last year, we had some lay participation, and this year, they were all done by members of the congregation, and they were extraordinary. I would say of a lifetime of attending that service, I can't think of any time that I've had more meaningful offerings given to me. I also think about all of these people who on any given Sunday could not be in church, either because of physical disability or because they were unable to get a bus or a cab or a subway. They can be in church. And we've heard from a whole lot of people who haven't been at church for a while, but now feel they're back in the congregation. And there's a diaspora from St. Bart's of people who, used to attend here when they were in New York and now live in Seattle, Washington, or Dubai, and they're watching, So that's to me some of the promise of this moment.
Several members of our centering prayer group have written in the chat or emailed me to say that centering prayer has been a big practice for them. We offered it once a week in a group pre-pandemic, but now they meet 3 times a week, and their prayer lives have gotten deeper and stronger because of it.
Oh, that's the thing. I feel like when all of this started, so much of what we were experiencing was loss. And that was real. That was real. And of course, we can't forget that so much of what we've experienced has been death. You don't ask for that. And you don't say that God gave us that. It's been tragedy. And there's something about being thrust into the arms of a living God. There's something about being forced by life to move with the Spirit. We have so many of these, I think, these pretensions toward control. We think we're in control of our lives. And I feel like part of what COVID has said is, that your best laid plans, we've all had to learn how to say, well, we thought we'd be able to do this by this point, but couldn't. And we thought we'd be able to do this. Didn't work that way. And we thought that it was spread by this. It isn't. Every moment we're learning, we're having to flex. And in the midst of it, we're maybe discovering something about being with God that we needed to know. And that we might want to hold on to, right? I hope that centering prayer group keeps going. I hope that the night prayer folk keep going. I hope that people who have discovered their own voice for preaching in their church, that next year, Good Friday 2022, God willing, if we're back in the building, I hope that you have lay people doing the reflections again. Don't go backward. Don't go back to normal. We weren't whole. We were not whole. I think that's true for us in our life as church. As we said, there were people who had kind of checked out of church who've now been able to check back in because we're online. There are people who felt like they couldn't dress right or do right or hold up appearances. And now it's not about appearances. There are younger generations. I hope that you've experienced this, younger generations, digital natives, who've been waiting for a chance to lead in their churches. And now with so much going online and so much just shifting, I think that there's room for those younger leaders, those leaders from the margins to step up. There are new mission efforts that a lot of churches have launched to connect with spiritually hungry, lonely people, and also physically hungry people. My prayer is that you will maintain that openness, that faithfulness, that flexibility after it is something you have to do. Let it be something you choose. I hope that the same gift stays with you when it comes to another part of what is cracked open for us. And in this, I'm thinking about the racial reckonings and awakenings that we have experienced over the last year. There are folk who have marched, folk who marched this summer and beyond, who had never done it. Folk who have held up signs for whom that was just not a part of their life. a good friend of mine, Jeff Smith, he's a deacon in the church. And before he was a deacon, or before he was working for the church center, he also serves on the Presiding Bishop's team with me. He's our chief operating officer. So before that, he was the risk management guy for various companies. So talk about risk averse, talk about like, give him a plan, make it stick, you know. And his heart's always been in the right place, but only this summer did he start going out. He lives in Connecticut. He would go out with his granddaughter, who's 6 years old. They live in Essex, Connecticut, and they would go out to the little town square in Essex with signs that said Black Lives Matter. And this is a tall white guy in his 60s, bald, you know, looks like the risk assessment manager guy that he is. Every week, holding up a sign, maybe even every day, I can't remember, but holding up a sign that said Black Lives Matter and inviting people into conversation in Essex, Connecticut. He got cracked open. Jeff got cracked open. A lot of us did. We called the names George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, now Dante Wright, and so many more. We made the connections in ways that we had not. People began to see that, oh, wait a minute, there's a connection between the COVID deaths and mass deportation and anti-Muslim hysteria and mass incarceration and broken treaties with indigenous peoples and Jim Crow segregation and lynching and anti-Semitism and Asian exclusion acts and slavery and Native genocide and manifest destiny and the heart of America. We saw all of these connections. And we were able to start naming white supremacy by its name. A year and a half ago, I remember doing presentations and I used the phrase white supremacy, and someone like tapped me on the shoulder and they're like, we don't say that. Like, we say it now. We talk about the fact that white supremacy is not just some matter of extremism. It's not just about tiki torches and Proud Boys. White supremacy is about the ideologies and systems that are designed to ensure the flourishing, superiority, and dominion of white people, white culture, and white bodies. Let me say that one again. That white supremacy is actually about the ideologies and systems that have been designed to ensure the flourishing, superiority, and dominion of white people, white culture, white bodies. We are talking about that. We are having, not just talking about it, we are reckoning with that. The fact that America was founded for the purpose of white flourishing, founded on the superiority of white bodies, whiteness, which is why America has been able to consume the lives and the bodies of people of color for its entire history. As a majority church, as a majority white church, I feel like we have been acknowledging how our decline lines up with our affiliation with whiteness and white superiority and white supremacy, instead of with the gospel of Jesus. I'm going to pose this question to you now, and I know I have this slide. A question about how you have seen in the last year of racial reckonings. What have you been discovering about racism, about racial identity? What has cracked open for you? What do you see differently? What are you doing differently? So again, feel free to send an email to Peter, or if you can do the chat. Peter and Dean, I posed these questions To you, my friends,
Sure.
what have these reckonings forced you to admit, to discover about racism, to see about racism and racial identity?
Well, and when you were talking earlier about Jeff, who you and I know, I was thinking that I might be a little like Jeff in that these are things that I have always believed in, but I had not taken to the streets before. I had not become overt in my advocacy, and so that was a new thing.
Mhm.
And I think I don't think I'm alone in this. The awareness of systemic violence towards people of color in different forms, either through law enforcement or through the judicial system or through acts of violence on the streets against Asian Americans. I mean, it has a lot of different forms, but I've said this to other people, having grown up in the 60s and 70s, when that song, "This Is the Dawning of the Age of Aquarius," was playing when I was in high school. I actually believed that. I thought, we're going to get better. We're not going to do some of these things. And this is the beginning of it. And I don't think I could have anticipated the sort of the pushback and the ways in which we are not only still fighting some of those battles, but maybe fighting them more desperately.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
No, I was ready for the Jupiter to align with Mars and guide the planets and love to steer the stars. You know
Yeah.
what happened?
And I've heard folks naming that as a part of what's been cracked open is their idealism, their understanding of this arc of progress, if you will, that was always moving up, always. And what they've realized is actually it's been more like a spiral. You know, that America, like every time we've kind of turned and seen light, these shadows would reemerge and kind of eclipse that light. And then the light would shine again, and then the shadows eclipse it again. And just that we've been going around and around like this without really knowing who would win. It's not a foregone conclusion. And I think that has been heartbreaking. It's been identity remaking for a lot of folks. Peter, what about for you? Or what are you seeing?
Well, I was going to say that in the chat, we've had people comment on history that they never learned, that they learned over the past year. Folks have commented that I didn't really know what people of color were going through until I listened carefully this year and heard their experiences. We've had people from parishes other than St. Bart's write in the chat about anti-racism ministries that have started at their churches.
Right.
We've heard people talk about sacred ground starting at their parishes. And I'll say for myself, I think one thing that I knew of and was aware of, but became even more immediately clear to me as we were thinking about questions of structural racism and white supremacy right after George Floyd's murder. I was preaching not the Sunday right after, but the next Sunday, which was Trinity Sunday. And the Hebrew Bible reading for the day was the creation story and thinking about what it means to be made in God's image. And I was thinking about images and even the images of God that are encoded in our building, and just knowing that white supremacy is in our building, this building we love so much, but what does the face of Jesus look like? And even as you and I were walking and going through the choreography this morning, what does it mean that up there at our altar we have Constantinople and Rome and then Canterbury in the center? What kind of what is being communicated through our building? And what's being communicated, you speak about this you write about this in your book as well, but what's being communicated in the kind of hymnody we sing, and who put together that hymnal, and how representative is that hymnal of people of color, also of people who are not male, and who put together our prayer book and all of that stuff. It's this tradition, this way of being Christian that we love so much, and yet is intrinsically woven with white supremacy, and that's what I welcome in this conversation. What has been difficult when you talk about cracking the church open, it is also so necessary, and I think and hope we're taking small steps towards that through the questions we've been asking in the past year.
Yeah, no, my team has worked hard on, especially that sacred ground, kind of like, really it's a small group experience, I think, is what we've come to realize we created. A small group experience where folks can talk about race using film as a way into learning about the racial history of America and our own racial histories and identities. And I think we now have 1,600 circles, not even just individuals, 1,600 circles for sacred ground. At least half of those have formed since the beginning of pandemic. There's so many people who are wanting to do this work, have this conversation. So many folk who know there's a lot they don't know, which again, for me, is the perfect starting place. Let's not start with, well, I already know all of these things. I heard one dude yesterday, I was listening to a podcast, and he was talking about rolling out your anti-racism resume, like how often white folk in particular, feel like they have to say, well, here's what I've done, and here's what I know, and here are the books I've read. And, I've had Asian friends, and I've had Black friends, and it's like, stop. I'm glad. And let's actually start with what you're still learning. And let's acknowledge what all of us are learning. That's a fine place where God can do something with us.
Stephanie, one of the things I've admired about your ministry, and it comes through in this book, is the wonderful tension that exists between, I love this church, and this church needs to be cracked open. Mm-hmm. And those two seem to exist comfortably in you side by side. I never doubt for a moment that you haven't given your life to this pursuit, and I never doubt for a moment that you're impatient. There's a holy impatience about your ministry that comes through in the writing, which I appreciate, because I think it's easy to be just angry or just Pollyannish, and I feel like we're called to live in the paradox and the tension.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, that capacity to sit with paradox and even to thrive in the midst of paradox is one of the things I love most about our tradition. That there are things that are unique and wonderful about being Episcopalian. I don't want to crack it all open and have nothing left. One of the things that I want us to be able to hold on to is this ability to sit with tension, to sit with paradox, to sit with both and, either ors, and to say that God loves us too much to leave us as we were. That's one of the great great phrases. I can't even remember who said it, but like God loves us as we are, and God loves us too much to leave us as we were. That real love, complicated love, is love that holds up that mirror and says, I know you're better than this. Not even I'm not telling you what you're like, that this is not all that you were created to be. That as a Christian community, you were created to be beloved community, to embody beloved community. And that we're not. That we have been so shaped by white supremacy. That we have been so shaped by elitism. That we have been so shaped by our need to control and to push God out of the way, honestly. We know this. I'm not saying anything, I truly believe I'm not saying anything that we don't already know. I'm just trying to put it back out there in front of us so that we can, with love, look in that mirror and then ask for the power of the Spirit to become what we were already created to be.
Now, Peter may have some questions. Do you have? If not, I have one, if prophets are always messengers from the future, give us a peek of a broken, open church. 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I mean, nobody has a crystal ball, but what do you think? What do you hope?
Oh, of course, the subtitle for the book is, it's Disruption, Decline, and New Hope for a Beloved Community. I am praying so hard that we would follow Jesus in his way of love. That the way of discipleship, a way that has been unhooked to some degree, from buildings and from hierarchies and from dependency on experts. I pray that what will happen over the next 5-10 years is this blossoming of small groups, a blossoming of circles of people who are seriously practicing Jesus's way, who come together as church, who come together for sacrament and for initiation and for nurture and for challenge and for all the things that we gather in larger circles for, but then go back into these regular, smaller communities. Mm-hmm. Of communities of practice, communities of Christian practice.
Not unlike the night prayer group that Peter talked about as an example of a small group of practice.
Mm-hmm. But what I would long to see, and what I think is possible, and is happening in a lot of places, is imagine that night prayer group, not only praying together, but beginning to share with each other, to really share life with each other. And maybe even once they can be together in person, maybe having small gatherings in people's homes over dinner, where they break bread and really break their lives open with one another, and now I'm thinking of the practices of the way of love, where they confess and talk to each other about, what is God challenging me to turn toward and to turn away from, where they read scripture together. I pray that these would become circles where folk do pray and really kind of offer their lives in vulnerable ways in their prayer with God, prayer with each other, where they worship and other the practices of the way of love. That's happening. Like night prayer, it sounds like it's right now probably more of a worshiping space and a prayer space. What if it also became a space for learning more about the ways of God? And then blessing. What if that group of people began to discern together, how will we be a blessing? in our neighborhoods and our families back to St. Bart's, back to the rest of the St. Bart's community? How will we be a blessing to New York? What if they started exploring together? How will we go? What if they together began discerning justice ministries, that they want to be engaged in ministries that forge beloved community? What if they went on retreat together and took Sabbath and rested? So those 7 practices of the way of love: turn, learn, pray, worship, bless, go, and rest. What if we had these small practicing circles of people engaging in the fullness of life with Christ, coming back together to be fed, going back in again? 10 years from now, if we are more a church like that, a church of practicing Christian communities, small Christian communities who move in and out and are not reliant on the building or on our clergy in order to grow our faith, we would be the most spiritually mature, the most powerful, like spirit powerful communities of people. We would be a different church. We would be church. That's my prayer, honestly, for 5 to 10 years from now, is that we have these vibrant communities of practice all over New York, all over the country, all over the world, united in our practice of Jesus's way. Those are beloved communities that forge more beloved community.
And my colleague Manny Rodriguez Leach has emailed me to make sure I mention that this is our hope for the St. Barts Connects program. If you're not in a St. Barts Connects group already, here's your opportunity to sign up for one.
Amen.
Accepting new interest, and that's starting to happen. It was just before COVID. The plan was for it to be in person. It's been happening virtually in these small groups. And we've seen it outside of the St. Barts Connects program in educational programs, prayer groups, etc. So it's starting to bubble up. But if this sounds appealing to you and you want to be cracked open like this, sign up for St. Barts Connects. And Veronica will put Manny's information in the chat.
We also should put a plug in for the Centering Prayer Group that is also meeting regularly and worshiping and sharing life together.
So Stephanie, we have only a few minutes left. I've gotten some really good questions. I'll just give you 3 of them and let you decide which, if any, you want to tackle. One is a question I often get as a millennial priest. How do we attract more young people? The second question, because you write about young people a bit in the book, the second question is if you can say something about the stewardship of privilege. That's the phrase. And the third is, how do we crack open the church if we're bound by these archaic rules and hierarchies and institutions? What do we do about these systems around us?
Good questions.
So I know that's a lot to tackle in 2 minutes, but I know you can do it.
Go.
I think I'm gonna take advantage of the opportunity to go a little into the stewardship of privilege. This was one of the parts of the book, Church Cracked Open, that I was most grateful to share with people. And so I'm gonna just do a quick screen share here. That I remember being asked to do an anti-racism training in the Diocese of Alabama, and the bishop said, "We'd really love you to do this with our clergy, but you can't use the phrase anti-racism." And that was what led me into this conversation, this image around the stewardship of privilege, and the idea that in truth, I don't know how to just give up privilege, how to not be privileged any longer. It doesn't work that way. A white person can say, "I don't have privilege," to which I would have to respond, "Bull, you absolutely have privilege. What will you do with it?" And to me, this is what gets really interesting, is how do we use our privilege in ways that Jesus used his? How do we love the face and the voice of God that we see in others the way that Jesus loved? How do we care for one another the way that Jesus cared for everyone and let his heart be broken open? Jesus's heart was broken open by the lives around him. and he cared. How do we care that much? How do we surrender like Jesus, risk like Jesus, listen like Jesus to the stories of others? Jesus was out there constantly listening and offering his heart in this beautiful way, and his ear in a beautiful way. He was constantly being changed by others. How will we risk and listen and be changed by others? So to me, I feel like Jesus is this perfect image for us of what it looks like to really sacrifice and to use your power. Instead of pretending you don't have power, use your power in order to help to dismantle the systems of domination and oppression. So I feel like that's the challenge, that's the invitation, especially in a church like ours where there is so much privilege. There just is. I think that there are ways that we can surrender privilege, but there are also ways that we can harness it and lay it at the feet of movements. And I want to see us discerning around that. And so for me, that's what the stewardship of privilege is all.
I think Stephanie oh, there we go. You froze up for just a bit, Stephanie,
Oh,
so
okay.
we heard the very last part, but.
Okay, yeah. Privilege, use your privilege for the sake of liberation. Boom.
Great. Unfortunately, we have to leave it there, but I am happy to tell you the conversation continues. First, in just a few minutes, Canon Spellers will be joining us as our guest preacher at our 11 a.m. worship service. So I hope you'll stay on and join us for that. And then Wednesday night, we have mentioned this before, the Crack It Open event. This is really kind of like an all-star event of Episcopal celebrities. So I hope you've blocked off your calendar to be there with all of these special guests. St. Bart's is one of the co-hosts of this event, along with Church Publishing, with the Church of the Heavenly Rest, Trinity Church Wall Street, and St. Mark's in the Bowery. This is really an event not to be missed, so we hope you will join us on Wednesday night. And the other thing I'll mention is next Sunday at the Forum, our guest is Miguel de la Torre, who's a professor of social justice and Latinx studies at Iliff School of Theology in Denver, and his subject is going to be decolonizing Christianity. So we will continue the conversation about what it means to crack this church open next week, and we hope you'll join us for that. Thank you so much for being with us, Stephanie. Thank you so much, Dean, and we hope all of you will join us for worship at 11 a.m.
God bless.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Stephanie.